So it's been a little over 2 months since the world started seeing a dramatic increase in COVID-19 cases, and because I've noticed that there are still some people who still can't stop playing the blame game with the pandemic and all the other chaos that is going on, which is probably leading to thousands of additional cases and deaths and worsening the global economy while they don't buckle down and fucking do something, I thought it would be a pretty good idea to lay the blame squarely on the one specific group most obviously, initially, purely, and objectively responsible, which is the government of China, or in a lower degree, communism as an ideology. Now, Styx Hexenhammer 666 has already made a video about this, and I believe Paul Joseph Watson and Ben Shapiro did the same as well. But I'd figured I'd make my own video talking about this too, just to add a few points, correct a few things, and articulate what they said a lot better. And I also want to fucking try to drive the point home, because people are blaming Trump, people are blaming Pelosi, the US government, people are trying to bring politics into this, people are being racist towards Chinese people even, Asians in particular, and all that. And I just want people to understand the actual truth as to who's really culpable for the pandemic, and for destroying the global economy and making 2020 the worst year in history. So that's essentially why I'm making this video. Just to tell you guys and explain to you why and how the Chinese government was able to ruin the entire year of 2020 and to basically destroy the entire global economy as a whole. Anyway, let's get right into it. China's government, when faced with a new disease, they were told by the medical foundation, hey, coronavirus is a thing. This disease is not the same as any known disease that we've seen in history. It's a new one. We've just discovered it. You need to do something about this. And they basically said, oh, fuck you. We can't do anything about it. We basically don't care. So here's the problem. The issue with the Chinese hierarchical structure is that when you have that level or degree of centrality, first, a doctor needs to approach the head of the department and let them know. The head of the department then needs to move toward the local bureau chief. The local bureau chief at that point alert the local officials. Those officials need to meet and converse with their higher-ups. And finally, after weeks and weeks and months of talking, delaying, and postponing and signing papers, writing and sending a few emails, making a few phone calls, and ensuring everything obliges to ideological communism, you then have to send it to Xi Jinping and wait there until he sits on it for some time before he responds. That is what essentially happened. For more than a month, that's what occurred. For numerous incubation periods, that's basically what happened. That also explains why the first case of coronavirus did not happen until mid-January, despite being first discovered in the fall of 2019. We would not be in this position that we're in right now if that whole procedure never occurred. 2020 would have went on as a normal business as usual year if that hadn't happened. If the coronavirus had surfaced, if COVID-19 had emerged, and the Chinese government raised the alarm and Jinping said the new virus has arrived in the city of Wuhan that we've just identified, we're gonna do all that we can to try to stop it. We're deploying test kits, we're barring the city off, we're locking the city down, nobody's permitted to leave their homes in the city, no travel or anything. If he had done all of that, it could have been successfully contained. We know this because the Chinese government has successfully done so before. The Chinese government actually did this a few years ago. There was a plague outbreak going on somewhere in the Tibet region. Some city of 200,000 or 300,000 in Tibet got effectively barred off by the military because there were several cases of bubonic plague being reported in that city, and some people were killed due to the plague. So when the Chinese government came in, they sent out the military, they barred the city off, locked the city down, and they successfully contained the plague. They wiped it out completely. They probably even annihilated its entire stockpile too. I believe they went out with flamethrowers and mustard gas to fumigate the entire countryside to kill every rodent possible. So, successful. Mission accomplished. Mass action worked at that case, all things considered. That is, of course, disregarding Tibet's human rights abuses from the Chinese government, obviously. If Tibet was an independent capitalistic nation like it wants to be, with a less centralized government and a fully functioning modern republic with democratic elections, the technological innovative accomplishment of the medical industry would likely be a lot more easily utilized and made use of because there would actually be a legitimate profit motive. So here in the West, if a new disease arrives, whether it came from an animal or escaped a viral research lab or whatever, you profit if you tell people. You would essentially become famous, so to speak. People will be talking about you a lot. You'll get your name in the papers. Your hospital will become famous and get recognized for having conducted the first tests. You get grants. You get a ton of clout. You get all these awards, all these promotions, along with a ton of other benefits as well. How it works in China, however, is the exact opposite. In China, if you try to stir things up, you'd get fired, you'd get arrested, or you get censored. You might even lose a portion of your social credit score even. Maybe you can't get a loan. You'll also have a harder time finding a new job even. That's the whole problem, and the Chinese government created that situation too. No one else is responsible. The Chinese citizens are not responsible just for, eating the wrong thing or species in their soup or whatever. They're not responsible for ruining the year. They didn't know that there was going to be a threat. They know that there was a risk. The Chinese scientists in that virology lab are not responsible. When a virus escapes that lab, they couldn't do anything about it because the government wouldn't let them. The rest of the world is not responsible. The US is not responsible. Trump doesn't make the rules for the communist government of China. They do. They make the rules that China and its citizens have to follow, and they force them to follow it. When an outbreak arrives there and it kills the worldwide economy and causes all of this chaos, they are solely, uniquely, and fundamentally the only group that can be responsible for it. Also, in a normal, typical situation, the people might be somewhat semi-responsible in some way, because if the education is there, if all the knowledge is there, and people do know, and it's still spreading, then it becomes someone else's problem. That's how it would technically work here in the West, because the government doesn't run every aspect of your life in the West. The government is not fully responsible for any of your actions in life. If you are, however, a slave technically, and everything that you say and or do is heavily spied on, censored, and policed for the entirety of your life, you almost don't really have any responsibility or any obligation over such actions. How can you be educated if the government, which has literally soaked up all capacity of the educational apparatus, is not coming clean with its people and not telling them the truth? By the way, this is why we need to avoid nationalizing and socializing things at all costs. Specifically, the two things most nationalized in China, Venezuela, and other communist nations, by the way. We've actually got 4 sitting members of Congress and a presidential candidate currently who all openly declare that those two same things should be nationalized, which are healthcare and education. Well, if you take a look at China now, doesn't seem to be working for them, and they've got both. In China, healthcare and education are 100% entirely ran by the government. The government takes full liability within those boundaries. The government chooses what you learn and when, and they force you to learn it. The government chooses what medicine you get and when, and they force you to take it. And it's all subsidized and publicly available and free of charge, at least to the citizens of China, that is. You don't have to stress over any expensive or out of pocket or anything like that. You can, however, pay a little bit more on the side to get better care probably, but that's because they've included a little bit of capitalistic elements into their constitution and developed a blended model, which ironically and oddly enough makes it better and more efficient than if it were actual full-blown pure communism, which by the way is also why the Soviet Union collapsed after the Cold War while China was able to survive. So there's a little bit of a fun fact for you guys in case you were wondering. So no, the Chinese government is responsible, and I've noticed some people are trying to be racist towards Asian people because of this epidemic. Asian people have nothing to do with this. They are not responsible for causing this pandemic. Stop being racist. Not all Asians are Chinese. And that's racist too. That's like looking at a Spanish person and automatically jumping to the conclusion that they're either Mexican or Colombian. And the Chinese citizens are not responsible either. They have a commie government that does everything for them. Sure, I don't find bat and or pangolin soup appetizing, but if they were to find a disease within those two animals, they couldn't do anything about it because their government would not let them warn people about it. I also noticed that the rest of the world is trying to blame the United States for the pandemic and for destroying their economy. Oh, the inadequate US response, it killed our global economy. What inadequate response are you talking about? Trump has nothing to do with killing our global economy. Yes, Trump could technically be liable for worsening the pandemic in the United States because our case numbers right now are off the charts. We have the highest number of cases out of the whole world, but I want you guys to keep this in mind. The US is gargantuan and has a population of almost 500 million people, substantially higher than any other state in Europe. And yet, if you do all the math, by ratio, per capita has an equal caseload and a lower death toll than much of what Europe does. Less than Italy, less than Spain, less than the UK, France, or Germany, and certainly less than South Korea, Iran, and China especially. And when you look at states like Florida and Georgia, people are also blaming Governor DeSantis in Florida and Governor Kemp in Georgia, saying that their response was inadequate too. Oh, Florida and Georgia's disastrous leadership with DeSantis and Kemp, Republicans suck. Ron DeSantis has nothing to do with this. Brian Kemp has nothing to do with this. It's not their fault. Blame Trump if you can. Don't blame the entirety of the Republican Party. And both Florida and Georgia, by the way, both Republican states, actually have lower caseloads compared to California, New Jersey, and even New York, especially. Which goes to show you that some governors are doing a better job in their states than how other states are doing. Certainly better than how Trump is doing for the whole country, so I fail to see how there's an inadequate US response. I do see, however, there's an inadequate presidential response, but not a whole inadequate US response for the whole country. Over 25 million people across the entire planet, not just the United States, have all filed for unemployment because of the pandemic. Republicans did not cause this to happen, neither did the Democrats. This economic downturn was caused by a pandemic that should have been contained, but was unable to be contained because a communist government in a communist country decided that it would be a better idea to completely ignore this outbreak by censoring its own people. All leaders in different countries, states, and territories are trying their best to stop this pandemic from spreading as much as possible. There are other countries who are doing a way better job than Trump, and people are still complaining about their response. There are other states that are dealing with the pandemic a lot better than how Trump is for the whole country, and people are still complaining that their state leadership sucks. What else can we do? Again, you're asking us to do the impossible, which is having to subsequently make decisions for other countries. Trump can't hop into a TARDIS or drive a DeLorean and go back 4 or 5 months in time to force the communist government of China to tell the rest of the world to prepare. Nancy Pelosi, Justin Trudeau, and Boris Johnson can't do that either. They should have told everyone from day one. From the very beginning, they should have just rung the alarm bells. At the very least, the medical reservoir there should have been fully assembled on day one. They should have just said, okay, well, we're not entirely sure about this. This is all just speculation, but we're being told that some doctors are seeing tests that are saying that there's a new disease. We're looking into this. We're going to do what we can. The rest of the world, you'll know eventually because we'll try to share data. They didn't share data. Not a single bit of data was shared. Even the US government is straight up lying when they're talking about this massive data sharing with the Chinese. Yeah, after 4 months of epidemic existing, when they finally acknowledged that the disease was actually there. Until then, they were just banning, arresting, and locking people up for putting footage of masked doctors and dudes in hazmat suits on Weibo. That's what the Chinese government's first and only initial response was, and it was, without a doubt, for social and economic reasons, of course, by all means. And at the very end, the Chinese have triumphed. The whole goal was to prevent Chinese unemployment from skyrocketing and Chinese markets from tanking while the rest of the world was saved. The entire objective was to keep 2020 from being the worst year in Chinese history from this outbreak while the rest of the world was doing just fine and going on with their year. China said, if we can't contain it, we want all of you infected so you can all share in the economic misery. Better a general economic turmoil for the whole entire world and millions of people suffering than millions of Chinese people suffering and everyone else doing just fine. That's essentially the logic there. It's extremely atrocious. It's incredibly abominable. It's inhumane. But that's communism, so there's nothing to be done about it, unfortunately. So, in conclusion, please stop with all the racism towards the Asian community. It's not their fault. It just makes you look like a retarded douchebag in reality rather than just saving the world. And don't blame the Chinese people. It's not their fault either. Their commie government makes every single decision for them. They're slaves. You could understand that. It's not the US's fault. We're not causing the whole entire world to be infected. A president or a prime minister of a Western country can't cause an outbreak not to exist that emerges in some other country. It didn't even come to North America for a couple of months. The United States and Canada were both case-free for some time, and don't give me this bullshit about this whole testing kit spiel and stuff, dude, because that's not what I'm talking about. That is a completely different story. Yes, we have a high case number. We have over 430,000 cases in the United States as of now, but the number of deaths is still, and has still in some way, kept pace behind parts of Europe that have also lower caseloads and, in some cases, went weeks without new cases. And there are some states and provinces that are doing a better job with dealing with the pandemic than what the president and prime minister were doing. That means it was not responsible for the paradox. It was because both the US and Canada's responses, or more likely than it was across the Atlantic, may even largely saved it primarily. We have fewer deaths in the long run, and we may see fewer deaths and cases in the long run. I am not trying to make this political in any way, shape, or form. Don't make things political with this pandemic, because that will only make things worse. This pandemic will end soon eventually. Wash your hands frequently. Avoid touching your face. Respect the 6-foot rule. And just relax at home while we're all stuck in quarantine. Watch a movie. Play some Animal Crossing or Call of Duty. Read a book. Do some jumping jacks in your living room. We will eventually start to see fewer cases in the long run as long as we flatten the curve as much as possible. We could develop a vaccine soon. There are a ton of scientists and companies working around the clock on an experimental vaccine right now. We might even have a cure. We got some Dutch company that is consistently talking about how it supposedly has one. Well then, where's the cure to COVID-19 then? Why isn't it being deployed? I mean, there are all sorts of experimental treatments that we can try. There are talks of using virophages. In Laos and Cambodia, they tried giving people some sort of cocktail with virophages in it, and some people did in fact recover. I mean, that's obviously something we know 97 to 98% of the time happens with phage therapy anyway, so it really isn't exactly a scientific rigor, so to speak. Phage therapy isn't relatively new. So now you've got cases all over the world. In every single country, we currently have around 1.5 million cases total of COVID-19. The worldwide unemployment rate won't stop rising. The global stock market won't stop crashing. So now it's everyone's problem. The whole world is dealing with this situation, not just the United States. Everything is literally being shut down across the world, and schools are being canceled and things like that. I mean, it's been kind of depressing in a lot of ways, especially if you're a high school senior like I am. You probably won't be able to go to prom with your boyfriend or girlfriend. We also probably won't be able to graduate properly and walk the stage. They might not even have a ceremony for us. I mean, they're talking about mailing diplomas to people this year because of this pandemic. The class of 2020 is probably going to be the only class in history that doesn't have the full senior year experience, and the only class in history that doesn't get its own ceremony and has to get their diplomas mailed in because of this pandemic. I feel defeated. No, seriously, I really do feel defeated. The fact that I cannot graduate properly and not walk the stage, and the fact that I cannot have the full experience of being a high school senior, and honestly, I feel defeated. The last time I felt this much guilt was from what I did to some people 4 years ago in my 8th grade year that killed some of my old elementary school friendships, which, looking back at it right now, makes me want to puke my fucking guts out. Luckily, I have changed since then, and I have become a better person, but unfortunately, I'm feeling that same exact guilt, that same exact level of guilt that I felt from those actions, all because of this pandemic, because my senior year has technically been foiled. My senior year has been completely ruined, possibly forever now, all thanks to this. Chances are I might be graduating without a ceremony, which I'm very pissed off about. All my plans to hang out with friends that I've anticipated have all been forcefully canceled because we're all locked in quarantine in our own houses. There's nothing we can do for this year. There's nothing we can do together for this year. We can't do anything now. So technically, the year of 2020 has been sabotaged and is now the worst year of my entire life, and is also the worst year in the history of humankind. And the fault of all of this lies at the feet of Xi Jinping and the rest of the communist government of China, and no one else. Nobody else caused this to happen. It was their decision, and their decision only, to prevent the rest of the world and its own population from reacting sufficiently and responding adequately by not telling them the truth and not telling them what was going on. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, and if you're new around here, be sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications. Be sure to follow me on all my social medias. Links are in the description below. I don't have anything else to say in this outro besides fuck the Chinese president, Shinny the Flu, as I like to call him now, and fuck the Chinese Communist Party. But until then, take care, talk soon, peace.